Okay, students, good day. Trust you are all well. This is the first video in a series of videos, and it's here to assist you with doing your activities and to use it for revision purposes. We're going to focus on chapter 1 and the 6 calculations. There are more calculations, but we are going to focus on the first 6, which is unit cost, total cost, total fixed cost per unit, total variable cost, and variable cost per unit. Now we're going to start with the cost per unit. I'm just briefly going to go through it to refresh you and to use it as a revision purposes. Now we're going to look at unit cost. Now each calculation has got a rule and a formula. Now some of the calculations has more than one formula, but I'm going to briefly go through it. Now with the unit cost, the rule here is unit cost or cost per unit changes as production change. Now this calculation only has one formula, and the formula is total cost of production over the number of units produced. Now here you can see in this example, the cost of production, is 5,000 Rand and the total cost is 100,000. Now, one of the things that I always tell the students, or that I have told you, is always establish where production has started. For example, in this example, production has started at 5,000 units. So my total cost is 100,000 divided by 5,000, and there's your cost per unit. Now, if production changes to 6,000 units, then the total cost as well as the cost per unit will change. Our total cost, the rule here is total cost will change as production changes. Now, in this calculation, there will be 3 formulas. Now, you can only use one of these formulas. Now, the formula you can use here that you're going to use will be dependent on the information they give you. So it's total fixed plus total variable, cost per unit times units, direct material plus direct labor plus applied overheads. Then we come into fixed cost. How to calculate total fixed cost. The rule first, total fixed cost never changes, even if production changes. And in this example, you can see our production started at 5,000 units and our total cost is 100,000. In this one here, production has changed, but the total fixed cost remains the same. There are 3 formulas to calculate total fixed cost. And as you know, from our time we had in class, it's add all the fixed expenses together, or fixed cost per unit times units, or total cost less total variable cost. Now we're coming to fixed cost per unit. The rule, fixed cost per unit will change as production changes. There's only one formula for this calculation. You take your total fixed divided by units. And here you can see our production started at 5,000. Our total fixed cost was 100 divided by 5. So you can see every time production changed, our fixed cost per unit has changed. Now we're coming to variable cost. How to calculate total variable cost. First, the rule, total variable cost will change if production changes. And here you can see, every time production changed, our total variable costs change. And like with total fixed cost and total cost, there are 3 formulas here. It add all the variable expenses together, or variable cost per unit times units, or the total cost less total fixed cost. Now you cannot use all 3 formulas. Again, the formula you can use here will be dependent on the information they give you. Then we're coming to how to calculate variable cost per unit. Now, many students have problems with this. It's because they don't apply the rule correctly. Firstly, the rule says variable cost per unit never changes, even if production changes. Now, what's the formula? There's only one formula. It's total variable cost divided by units. Now, this is one of the reasons why you must always establish where production starts. Now, in this first scenario here, our production started at 5,000. And at 5,000, our total variable cost was 100,000. So we take the 100,000 divided by 5,000 gives you 20 Rand. Here, the production has changed, and the rule says variable cost per unit never changes. So how much was the variable cost per unit when we started? It was 20 Rand. We use the same information like we used over here. We take 100,000 divided by 5,000, and we still get 20 Rand, even though our production has changed, because the rule says it never changes. In the third scenario here, our production has changed to 4,000, but our variable cost per unit will remain 20 Rand as it did when production has started. So we take the same information when we started out. There's 100,000 divided by 5,000 gives you 20 Rand, even though production has changed. Now, what I'm also going to add to this video is a little activity or an example. Always, we're going to read what they give us. The following information are given to you as a cost and management accountant of Quick Manufacturers. Our total fixed cost was 700, our total variable cost was 300, and our production is 100,000. Now, I'm going to put in brackets 1. What does that mean? That is where our production started. Now, like I give with each activity, there's a little template, and this template is there to assist you to do the calculations. The first thing you must put in there, identify your total fixed cost, which is 700,000. Then my total variable cost is 300,000. Then the units is 100,000. Now you need to calculate fixed cost per unit at the first level. There's only one formula, total fixed cost divided by units. And our total fixed cost was 700,000 divided by 100 units, gives you 7 Rand. Then we got to calculate variable cost per unit. You take 300,000 divided by 100,000, gives you 3 Rand. Then total cost. Now with total cost, there's 3 formulas. And like I said earlier, you can only use one of the formulas. Now, I've attached the formula sheet here. A formula sheet is there as a quick check instead of going through the notes. And there is total cost. There are 3 formulas. We can't use all 3 at the same time. There's our total cost. We can only use one of the 3 and dependent on the information. The one you can use is total fixed plus total variable. There's 700 plus 300, and that gives you 1,000,000. To calculate cost per unit, there's only one formula, total cost divided by units. So it's 1,000,000 divided by 100,000 gives you 10 Rand. Then I've got another template here, which says changes and no changes. So which calculations will change when our production moves from 100,000? It either increases or decreases. There's 4 calculations that will change: your total cost, your total variable cost, your cost per unit, and your fixed cost per unit. Then which calculations will not change even if production changes? It's total fixed cost and variable cost per unit. Now I'm going to answer the questions. Question 1 asks, calculate the fixed cost per unit if 10,000 units were to be produced. The first thing you ask yourself, did production change? And the answer is yes. We started with 100,000. Now we're producing 10,000. The next question you ask yourself, if production changes, does the calculation change? So now you look for fixed cost per unit. It's falling under changes. There it is. So it will change. How many formulas are there to calculate fixed cost per unit? We're going to go to our formula sheet. There's only one formula. It says total fixed cost divided by units. So there's my total fixed cost. I write out the formula, which is 700,000. It never changes. Divided by 10,000 gives me 70 Rand. The next thing we're going to focus on, total variable cost if 20,000 units were to be produced. First question, did production change from when we started? Yes. We produced 100,000 and now it's changed to 20,000. Next question, does variable cost per unit change when production change? It falls under the no changes when production change. Now, how much was variable cost per unit when we started? It was 3 Rand. Now, there's only one formula when you calculate variable cost per unit. And that formula is total variable cost divided by units. Because variable cost per unit doesn't change, we use the same information. Total variable cost divided by units. So my total variable cost when I started was 300,000. My production when it started was 100,000, and it gives me 3 Rand. You see, even though production has changed, my variable cost per unit hasn't changed when I started producing, and there it is. The next thing you need to calculate is total fixed cost if 60,000 units were produced. First question, did production change from when we started? We started with 100,000 and now it has changed to 60,000. Next question, does the total fixed cost change when production changed? So now we look under changes and no changes. So it says it does not change. So how much was our total fixed cost? 700,000. That means it will remain 700,000. Now, students, you need to write the answer. Don't write it never changes or stays the same. So there we go with that. Next question. Calculate the total cost if 70,000 units were produced. First question, did production change from where we started? Yes. We started with 100,000 and now we are producing 70,000. Next question, does total cost change when production change? So we look under changes. Yes, it does change when production change. How many formulas are there? Let's go under total cost. There are 3 formulas. Now the formula you're going to use most of the time is this one here. Total fixed plus total variable cost. So let's go here. There it is. Total fixed plus total variable cost. Now, how much was my total fixed cost when I started? 700,000. Can I use the same total variable cost? No, because here it says total variable cost will change. So that means I have to calculate a new total variable cost. And the formula you're going to use most of the time to calculate a new total variable cost whenever production change is this one, variable cost per unit times units. So let me go there for you. There it is, variable cost per unit times units. And what was my variable cost per unit? I used the variable cost per unit when production started, 3 Rand, times it by the new units of 70,000. And there's my total variable cost. So now I can calculate my total cost. I say 700,000 plus 210 gives me 910,000. Next, they tell you to calculate cost per unit if 30,000 units. Question 1, did production change? Yes. Question 2, does cost per unit change? Yes. So what does that mean? I have to calculate a new cost per unit. So how many formulas are there to calculate cost per unit? There's only one. And the one is total cost divided by units. Now, can I use the total cost when we started of R1,000,000? No, because it falls under changes. So that means I first have to calculate a new total cost before I can calculate a cost per unit. And just like in the calculation in 1.1.4, I first have to calculate a new total cost, and the formula I'm going to use is total fixed plus total variable. My total fixed cost is 700,000, but I need to calculate a new total variable cost like I did in this example here, or this question here, 1.1.4. And to calculate a new total variable cost, I use this formula, which is variable cost per unit times units. And my variable cost per unit here is 3 Rand because my variable cost per unit never changes. And there's my variable cost per unit. And I multiply that with the new units of 30,000. And there's my new total variable cost. So to calculate, there's my 790 plus 700, and that's my total cost. So now I can calculate my cost per unit of 790 divided by 30,000. Students, like I said, this is the first video in a couple of videos for this particular chapter. There's 2 more calculations, and that will be included in my next video. I hope you find it useful. I will forward it to you on the various platforms, and then you can look forward to the next couple of videos. Thank you.